Hello everyone and welcome to our Vauxhall live stream today. We are playing Animal Crossing to hopefully engage you guys and understand sort of priorities around Vauxhall as an area in South London, which we're visiting on Saturday to do a live event with young people and families across the full day. So today is a bit of a precursor event online to kind of get an idea as to sort of priorities in advance of that. We're joined today with obviously myself. My name is Abby. I'm a designer at New Practice. We also have Duncan.
Hello everybody, I'm Duncan. I'm an associate at New Practice.
And finally we've got Becca.
Hi, I'm Becca. I'm creative director at New Practice.
And what we're going to do is quickly kind of show you around our island and what we're looking to do over the course of today. And then we'll kind of get a bit of an introduction from Becca, who is sort of leading this particular project, and kind of get a bit of a background as to what we've been doing and why we've been doing it, as well as who we've been doing it for. So really quickly, to give you an idea of what today is going to bring, we're inviting members who have access to Animal Crossing via the Dodo code in the bottom right-hand corner on your screen. And you'll come along, follow the wee flags, and we'll start the engagement. So we've been spending quite a few hours, maybe more than I'd like to admit, trying to set this up and make sure the island is ready for guests. So today, if you join, we've got a little waiting area for you. If you want to sort of pick up a party popper, we'll give you a bit of an introduction. We also have sort of LFA and New Practice flags around to give a bit of a festival feel. So today we're going to be focusing on 3 particular themes around priorities. So firstly, sort of understanding what is most important to you in regards to the environment. What is most important to you in regards to making sure that Vauxhall is a great place for young people. And then finally, sort of activity around priorities, around sort of making sure that Vauxhall is a great place for communities. Thanks, Duncan, for your reaction. So, even though you may not have access to Animal Crossing, we're going to make sure that you can take part, and Duncan and I will be sort of your avatars, trying to sort of, oh, got a person in my way, trying to show on screen, using Animal Crossing, sort of the feedback that you're giving. So we invite you, as we pop questions up throughout the engagement today, to engage via the live chat, which should be to the right of your screen, which Duncan has just sort of indicated there. So yeah, we'll get started. Maybe give people a couple minutes to join should they wish, and then we'll kind of get Becca to do a bit of an introduction for the project for us.
While we wait, I'll come and find Abby. Got to decide which outfit I am gonna facilitate in today, so I've got a few different options. I've shown up initially in my kind of work outfit, I guess my construction outfit, but I can switch if I want to into perhaps a more London Festival of Architecture specific outfit. I don't know, do you think this is more appropriate for this afternoon?
I think it's very festive.
It is pretty festive.
The outfit that I'm adorning today is largely based on the outfit I'm currently wearing. I've drawn a little fringe for myself as I was inspired. We've done a couple of short events beforehand that sort of have invited other people, other Animal Crossing folk to join our island and have a wander around, give us feedback, and one of the particular people who managed to pop onto the island had drawn her own eyebrows, so I was inspired by that creativity to put my fringe on there. So what we'll do is we'll just give you a bit of an introduction. So Becca, if you could tell us quickly sort of how this project came around to begin with.
Yeah, so new practice working with Vauxhall to put on this event as part of London Festival of Architecture. And we've been speaking with Vauxhall for a couple of years. A few years ago we ran Memory Monsters, which was an event in the park in Vauxhall Pleasure Gardens, where we dressed up as 5 monsters based on architecture of Vauxhall to start a conversation around the neighbourhood and what might happen there. And this is really an extension of that relationship with Vauxhall, thinking about new or kind of innovative different ways we could engage with communities, particularly with young people in Vauxhall, around changes to their neighbourhood that might be led by a community and business organisation like Vauxhall One. So the LFA this year is obviously a blended event. So as part of that, we've really taken a lot of the aesthetic of Animal Crossing, and we're using that in a physical event on Saturday. But these digital events and the islands that Abby and Duncan have been building up over the last month is really the kind of digital expression of the sorts of questions and queries and things that we want to be doing in the physical event on Saturday. So we will have options to build things, we will have our own little physical islands in the park, and we'll also have some animals visiting us from Vauxhall City Farm, which I am super excited about because I love an alpaca. So that's really where this project came from. It's funded by Vauxhall One, so it's really important for them that we speak to you guys about what you might want and need for Vauxhall to exist. And also London Festival of Architecture this year has the theme of care. So we're really thinking about how we care for our communities, how we care for young people within those communities, and then as a wider, broader theme, how we care about our environment, our planet, as we're in the midst of a climate crisis.
Great, thank you so much. And maybe if you could kind of tell us perhaps a little bit more about why we've chosen Animal Crossing as a vehicle to kind of do this engagement, or even sort of a wider theme, perhaps?
Yeah, so for us, or for our practice, digital engagement, ways of bringing people into digital spaces is something we're really keen on making sure we get right. We have tried other gamified options in the past. We've done some work with Minecraft previously, which was very fun. And we wanted to see if we could use a different platform, something that was very, very popular during the kind of lockdowns of last year, to do something similar. So this isn't, quite Minecraft. You can't quite do all the same things, but what could we do in Animal Crossing that is interesting and different to the ways that we can work in Minecraft? So that for us, this is really an exploration of how we create spaces within games, spaces within digital places where we already are. There's no point in us creating new digital places for you all to come to. We're already in Animal Crossing, we're already in Minecraft, if we're already on TikTok. Those are the spaces that we should really be to speak to people. So that's it.
Yeah.
I think as an Animal Crossing game follower and fan myself, it's been really interesting in the year since the game was released, seeing how, you know, the kind of amazing levels of creativity that people are putting into creating places. These are obviously completely cartoonish and fantastic places, but so many of the decisions are based on, you know, really, really interesting kind of creative thought processes that I think, you know, gives the game a real opportunity to be a space to kind of talk about priorities and talk about how you go around making those sorts of decisions.
And most of us don't get to mess around with placemaking to try things out because it's expensive to do it in the real world. So this sort of, this simple more simple game approach is a really interesting way to think about how we create neighbourhoods, what's in all of our villages, what's in all of our islands that we've made to be our perfect spaces.
Yeah, I agree. I think as well, on top of that, one of the reasons that Vauxhall, why Vauxhall with Animal Crossing in particular was obviously kind of Becca talked about having this previous engagement and having a relationship with the city farm, and then also kind of linking sort of Vauxhall and that fantastic asset and being and animals and that kind of animal experience being something that perhaps is very dear to lots of Vauxhallians, I guess. We felt that Animal Crossing was quite a nice kind of play on that and a way to kind of celebrate that and highlight that as well. So yeah, this is all the reasons why. So I guess I think 4 p.m. maybe isn't the best time for people to kind of join on Animal Crossing. So we'll get cracking on the YouTube version.
So what we're doing over the course of the rest of today, we have this session between 4 and 4:30, and then we're jumping back on again between 5 and 5:30, and then a final session at 6 to 6:30. So half an hour to kind of meet up with people in Animal Crossing or via YouTube and through the comments section, and take part in a series of priorities exercises. So as Abby suggested before, we created these spaces within the game where we're exploring the 3 themes that are going to be explored in the real live event in Vauxhall Pleasure Gardens on Saturday. And then we're going to be using a variety of props and tools from the Animal Crossing game, in particular fruit. Fruit is the first, one of the first things that you get to pick when you go to your island. You land on your island, and each island is randomly assigned one of the, I think, 6 different types of fruit that are available in the game. So we brought them all together in Vauxhall, and they're going to be our tokens that we use to help select some of the key priorities in the 3 themed areas that we're looking at. While we're kind of getting started with this first session, it might be useful to just take a little tour of some of the other parts of the island and have a look at what we've been up to in the 4 live stream sessions that we delivered on the last 4 Wednesday afternoons.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So I think, right, where should we begin? So yeah, I have been in my spare time building up this island. So I guess those who may not be familiar with Animal Crossing, I guess the idea is that you're given or get to create a little avatar which could represent you or a future you that you'd like to be, and you're given a little house, and the idea is that you create an island that is accessible and inviting to as many residents as possible. I think you have a max capacity of around 10 residents, but essentially you get given little tasks as well as kind of small adventures that you kind of have to go on and undertake to make sure that your island is sort of bigger, better, more fun and inviting again for these residents. It's largely a decorating game for me. So yeah, let's go into some highlights as someone who's surrounded by sort of placemaking and making sure that things are nice for people to be in and experience. This has kind of been my take on something that I've been able to build from brand new. So this is my house. We've got a white garden here, which is inspired by my own father, who is apparently also planting a white garden. I'd say key spaces that we've built that perhaps is, reflective of place shaping is this kind of small area which has lots of sort of space and toys for young people to access. It's sort of right outside the main hall, so I wonder if it's a space that, people could leave their kids with a trusted neighbor or something whilst people could kind of run and do their shopping. We've got this sort of shopping. Ooh, I decided to stand and wave my flag. We've got the sort of shopping area up here where we've got a museum because culture is incredibly important, but also a retail space. We have right on the beach sorry, I'm dipping in and out of houses at the same time. Oh, not this beach. Oh yeah, this beach. Cool, so we've kind of got a bit of a leisure, someone having a little nap. We've got a little leisure space here for people to come and have picnics, very community focused, sort of bring your own food, fires are always going. But again, sort of spaces for people to come and congregate, I think, and sort of celebrate perhaps something. And then I'd say finally, the last sort of community-focused health related sort of aspect of the island that we've been building is this sort of physical fitness beach. I feel like if I had to go to the gym, at least let's make it somewhere that's outdoors and a nice scenic area. So we've got that as well. I think as on top of that, the last comment that I would say was perhaps something that's to do with the priorities that we're thinking about today is we've got lots of food growing across the island. One of the residents once commented to me that the island smelt really nice because of all of the oranges growing. And I think this idea of sort of community growing and growing spaces that sort of publicly accessible could be perhaps important to the conversations that we have in Vauxhall. So yeah, those are sort of the big hitters, I'd say. All the little houses that you see are different residents that have decided to come and be on the island. So cool. So we can start our first boating activity.
So we are exploring 3 different themes, as we've already spoken about. How can we care for our community? How can we care for young people? And how can we care for the planet? So over the course of the 3 sessions this evening, those are some questions that we want to throw out, and we can have a little discussion about some of our own thoughts about those. What we're going to be doing in the sessions on Saturday in the real Vauxhall Pleasure Gardens, there's a couple of different things. So there's an opportunity to get your hands, kind of get active using a variety of kind of building tools. So we've created some kind of cardboard octagonal tools that people can slide together to create, to basically experiment with kind of building and built form, and have a conversation with some of our team about some of the creative ideas they're coming up with. We also have these kind of priorities exercises, and what we're looking to do is to kind of spark a conversation. It's quite informal and quite, easygoing, but it's to spark a conversation about different ways and different priorities about care. So the wider themes of the London Festival of Architecture for 2021 is around this kind of open provocation, care. What is care? So we want to, explore care in the community, care for young people, and care for the planet. And there's a few different ways we want to ask people about how they might prioritize some of those options. So, is care in our community about creating kind of high streets and spaces for interaction, a bit kind of around hospitality and kind of commercial space? Is it about kind of cultural, sporting activity through kind of groups and events? Is it about access to kind of local green space, a bit like Vauxhall Pleasure Gardens? And are there kind of aspects of that kind of wider question about, how does all this fit into a much larger question about how we care for the environment? Obviously, there's no real true kind of priority that all of these in reality work together in complex ways, but we wanted to kind of throw out and ask people a little bit about what they feel are the kind of priorities that they would like to share with us. So if you are watching along and you want to drop your own thoughts in the chat, you can also paste one of the emojis that we've popped in the chat as your kind of vote for the priority that means the most to you. In terms of community, our work as an architecture practice is really focused around kind of enabling community organizations to have greater stake in the development of the built environment. So to bring them closer to kind of decision making, closer to kind of the power to make change and to kind of be active agents in change in their local communities. So we're, that's one of our kind of favorite topics is around how do we focus a lot of community and work alongside community organizations in a really kind of targeted way to help make really careful decisions about how to use that that really precious time and energy. Oh, we've got someone who has popped into the chat. We've got an apple. Hello, Cara. How are you doing this evening? Or this afternoon, rather. So, you've picked an apple. If you're able to drop in the chat, we'd love to hear a little bit more about why you picked an apple. That's, of course, around kind of shopping, eating, and high street leisure. So, that's a really key. It has been a really key topic, I think, for everyone across the kind of last 18 months. The pandemic has really changed our relationship to our local high streets, I think, in kind of ways that weren't anticipated. So in some respects, we have been using our high streets even more. I know my personal experiences, I haven't been doing my big shop. My experience has been, shopping local, and I think that's been really exciting. But we also know that it's been a huge challenge for kind of small, independent and local businesses to operate under really, really tricky conditions where regulations have changed. There's been a lack of kind of opportunity to have a kind of consistent run of being able to operate as people had done before. So yeah, I think it's something that's really interesting. We've been exploring it across a few of our projects. Is what does COVID-19 and what does the pandemic really mean for the high street beyond COVID? Like, what's the kind of story after COVID? If anyone has any thoughts kind of about how their use of the high street has maybe changed over the last year. Cara says, more places to eat would be amazing, especially indie businesses. I think it's really been, I find it really, really interesting the way in which COVID has been a time where obviously loads of independent hospitality businesses have really, really struggled with not being able to open. But there's been a real sense of kind of experimentation in some respects. Like, there's been lots of places that have tried something new in the space that they perhaps didn't have before. Mm-hmm. I think it's pretty exciting. But also, it still seems like a kind of a long way until things return sufficiently to normal. I'd be really fascinated to know if anyone watching feels that they've if going forward, if they can imagine continuing to use the high street in a way that's been different than they had done before. Mm-hmm. I like to think that I will.
I guess as well, like, if there's opportunity, there's lots of people who have gone out on a limb, have tried something new, and are now kind of, finding their sea legs somewhat in this kind of new version of what a high street could look like. It would be interesting to know what kind of ways in which we want the high street to change, what would be reflective of our needs, wants and desires. I think largely perhaps to date it's been driven perhaps not necessarily by sort of indie businesses. How can we kind of make that change? What steps would be required in order to do that would be quite interesting.
And I know that our we've developed this kind of relationship with Vauxhall One as a kind of local organization who are really committed to kind of supporting and shouting about all of the kind of fantastic independent businesses, both kind of shops but also hospitality businesses that exist across Vauxhall. And I think that's been I think as in other spaces where there's that kind of fragility because of COVID, like having organizations like that which can create a network that's kind of that's supportive and helps to share that story is really fantastic. We've got another emoji.
We do. We have cherries, which is access to local green space and facilities from Alexandra Blunt. If you had any kind of ideas, Alexandra, about sort of why you enjoy green space and what in particular you would require from a green space, feel free to pop into the chat. I know that Vauxhall, the gardens that we are popping up, Vauxhall Pleasure Gardens, is loved by the community. But when I kind of think about green space, when we talk about green space, particularly with sort of our projects, there's lots of different ways in which people use them. And sometimes those kinds of uses can come at heads of one another. Some people perhaps find green spaces intimidating because of particular uses, but some people kind of find them an opportunity for sort of connecting to nature or getting exercises or doing exercises, getting exercise, but also just sort of connecting with people, having a space to sort of come together that is cheap or even free, as well as perhaps having a bit of a daycare scenario should there be something like a play park or something like that where, there's shared sort of vigilance and shared I guess responsibility for young people in a particular area, which is useful for parents perhaps to kind of have a bit of a relaxing time, kind of making sure that their children, young people are kind of getting exercise, but also, are in safe spaces. I know that Alex has popped in, thinks that green space can culture a more positive space outside the hustle and bustle of life. I think that's very true, in particular in spaces in big cities like London.
Yeah.
These green spaces are definitely respites for people who have a very busy life, particularly people who may have kids or several jobs or have sort of busy lives for several other reasons.
I think in cities where access to your own garden, I think that's another kind of reflection on COVID, is that green space has been really vital for people. Some people are fortunate and have their own space that they can sit outside and to socialize. But while we're still in an era where socializing is really being encouraged as a kind of outdoor activity, I think that those sorts of nearby available green space within neighborhoods is absolutely so vital. And I think what's really interesting, and this is again in a space like Vauxhall Pleasure Gardens, is the way in which a space can sort of change in its mood and its operation, so that sometimes it operates as a space for quiet, getting kind of feeling that you're maybe getting away from it a little bit, having your own space, but also it can become the space for events, and I guess it's about balancing those needs of people to have access to green space for relaxation, but also with the opportunity that it does. And what Alexandra's just commented on there is how it can play a role in that kind of idea of fostering community. It can be a gathering space, and I think the history of Vauxhall Pleasure Gardens is really, demonstrative of that. It was a space for outdoor performance, and it was this kind of very, kind of quite theatrical space, and I think that if a space can offer both at different times and really kind of go across, the needs of community, I think that's a hugely valuable asset.
Yeah, I agree. I wonder if we pop on the next question for another theme. So the next one we can do is sort of young people. So that's being represented here by this sort of jungle gym. So great. This time, same fruits, different themes. So the priorities that we're looking at today in regards to sort of young people are sort of education, employment, training, and training opportunities, represented by the apple. We also have support and care, represented by the peach, physical health by cherries, young people dedicated spaces, represented by the orange, and finally environmental health, represented by the pear. So if you have any questions particularly about these kind of themes, we tried to pick umbrella themes that kind of captured different actions that we're going to be sort of exploring a bit more in depth on Saturday. But hopefully this should be fairly self-explanatory. I think in regards to sort of support and care, the themes that we're exploring, it's definitely to do with sort of mental health, making sure that there's sort of an area for respite for young people, as much as, you know, being an adult is stressful, being a young person and going through school is an incredibly stressful time. I don't know if anyone else agrees. That was certainly my experience. But yeah, just making sure that there's frameworks, systems that are there in order to kind of support our young people through this particular time as people sort of discover and find themselves or pursue new things for the first time, or kind of understand next steps between, you know, particularly between that sort of ages between 16 to 18, 16 to 20, where you're kind of going and undertaking those next steps into adulthood. So we've kind of got a joint answer here from Alexandra again for the apple and the pear. So this is education, employment and training opportunities, as well as support and care, which are two really great ones. I wondered if you wanted to, or felt that you would want to share a little bit about perhaps what you would have enjoyed as a young person in regards to these themes, or what you think would be important for the young people of Vauxhall's future, or young people in, you know, the UK's future.
I think, you know, again, COVID has really been, and I know that, you know, we might, there's a real challenge in understanding when we're having these sorts of conversations is, are you trying to imagine beyond COVID? Is there a kind of beyond COVID? And it really becomes quite complicated to unpick, like, what is something that we feel is like an immediate priority to deal with, like what has been, you know, an incredibly challenging period across the last, you know, 18 months. But I think people's experiences of education, of, you know, post-education, and the kind of trajectories that you take from leaving school have been really, really massively impacted over the last year. And, you know, fingers crossed that's something that returns to normal. But what are the kind of some of the reflections that we maybe have on, you know, how we can prioritize, you know, how we can prioritize, and making sure that, you know, that new approaches are kind of embedded going forward. And I think, you know, what is the role that some of the things that we discussed in the previous theme around, you know, access to green space, you know, what is the overlap, like a, you know, I know that, you know, outdoor education and you know, looking at organizations like the City Farm, like how these kind of fantastic spaces that offer kind of huge educational resource kind of link to you know, to maybe a change in the way that we kind of orientate education, maybe de-emphasizing the classroom and over kind of outdoor space and outdoor learning, which has, you know, been a huge shift in the last few years.
Yeah, and so Alexandra's comment kind of largely talks about sort of this linear way in which young people sort of have to move through education, or feel as though they should move through education. I presume sort of going primary, high school, and then go into sort of further education and then get a job, and that being, you know, a pathway which is perhaps largely accepted but isn't necessarily the most applicable for everyone, or the most accessible for everyone, which is incredibly important, with lots of different people having different sort of strengths in different areas, whether that be academia or very physical labor or sporting. I think that, or it would be interesting to kind of explore outside of this linear pathway how we can kind of get people to where they want to be. It doesn't necessarily need to be through this particular sequenced experience, and I think that's largely what Alex has kind of brought up there. It would be interesting as well, Duncan, you were sort of talking about these overlaps. I think that's where lots of innovation can happen. Kind of understanding where these overlaps are, or even kind of creating new overlaps, which makes something that kind of previously been understood, not taken for granted, but just something that has been expected or accepted as a way of doing things, be given a completely new lease of life, a completely new weight, a new way of doing things, which is exciting or enticing for different types of people. And people with, or young people in particular, with different kinds of strengths. So yeah, I think that's definitely a valid point. I wonder, being conscious of time, if we wanted to move into the final theme of environment, which again, perhaps there is lots of overlap. We obviously are aware of sort of these forestry schools or outdoors schools, which, you know, may not necessarily be appropriate for Vauxhall, but something worth exploring. Are there green spaces nearby that could be utilized a little bit more in order to sort of push environmental education, or something to that degree, sort of this community planting that I was talking about earlier? I know I've done a recent workshop with young people in Ealing, and they were sort of they were year 6, so I believe around 10, but I might have got that wrong. And they were incredibly concerned about their environment, what they could do, how to keep their rivers clean, making sure that animals are looked after and are being given opportunity to thrive, or even just not given the opportunity to thrive as best case, but they were aware that their actions and people around them's actions can be detrimental, and they just sort of understood and wanted to know the ways in which that sort of detriment could be avoided, let alone sort of, or before rather, sort of understanding how we could then create spaces for these sort of species to thrive. So yeah, now we're on to the final theme of how can we care for our planet. So our themes, or sorry, the icons that we've got related to each priority is apple for changing behaviors, peach for supporting others, cherries for taking part in community-led green activities, orange for activism, and pear for improving green space. So I think the one that I'll sort of clarify a little bit more is definitely taking part in community-led green activities. The ones that we had in mind are kind of ones that I just mentioned there, sort of green growing, litter picking, sort of space for education on these sorts of issues. So hopefully that kind of keeps things very clear. So yeah, feel free to kind of pop your vote in the chat.
I think the question about that kind of, it's interesting trying to unpick, you know, the difference between acting local, the kind of acting local, thinking global sort of divide, and understanding how, you know, your input and engagement at a local level can have these kind of, you know, can have a role in that much wider conversation is something that I think younger people are maybe more attuned to, having grown up in an age where, you know, the climate crisis is a, you know, a big topic. You know, I certainly can remember a time when I was young where it still wasn't this kind of, you know, massive kind of center point of our kind of, you know, of our kind of shared culture. And I think, yeah, it's really exciting, but also, you know, very you know, it's quite you know, anxiety inducing in some respects to think about how young people kind of wrestle with that, you know, that huge topic. But you know, you just have to look at, you know, the climate strikes over the last few years and the kind of you know, the kind of positive enthusiasm that's kind of come through, you know, primarily kind of young people.
Yeah, I agree. I think obviously we've kind of had Alexandra pop in sort of activism as an orange, which is great because it was largely what I was going to move on to, based on kind of what you were saying there, Duncan. I think one of the key things that's perhaps a bit different for young people now is having role models, particularly like Greta Thunberg, as these sort of activist young people role models, and it kind of shows a pathway for, or even gives an example of someone who is young but has power and has weight in these spaces despite being a young person. And I think that making sure we have sort of people, particularly young people in these spaces who aren't necessarily there just for a checkbox exercise, is something that's incredibly important. We need more people who are seen to have power, seen to have influence. And I think that that's something that is kind of popping up more and more as we kind of move through this climate crisis. I think as well, one of the things that we need to kind of address when we're talking about young people in these spaces, and it's all very well that they have these role models, but I think the flip side to that is we would need to then address the ways in which that is being talked about, and the sort of surrounding reaction from people who are older than young people, and perhaps kind of have a bit of a dialogue around that. How can we change this kind of maybe sort of older person's mentality of like, they're there, we've all been through it before. What are the ways in which that we can perhaps get everyone sat around a table and having the kinds of conversations that we need to have in order to create a power balance? I know I'm talking about power a lot, but I think that it's important when we're kind of talking about these things.
And I think Alexander sort of points out that, you know, there is that kind of split between your local efforts and those kind of wider kind of political and kind of power brokery types of conversations. And I think at the level of Vauxhall, you know, how can we engage, you know, how are young people engaged in those sorts of local efforts? And I think it's really interesting seeing, you know, around the country, the way in which young people are engaged in exercises which aren't actually that dissimilar to, you know, to you know, groups of or, you know, I guess more traditional activities, you know, the kind of local place in bloom type you know, programs that are, you know, that have been doing exactly this sort of thing around kind of how do you consider a space that's, and you know, it's place-based activism of a sort, in that it's, you know, thinking of how you generate you know, a really fantastic place through greenery and growing, and then when you kind of tack on that mindset of like how that engages with this contemporary conversation about the kind of wider impacts of the climate crisis, you know, there seems like such you know, such huge opportunity in that space. So I think we've reached about 20 to 5. So we're going to take a break for about 20 minutes and pop back on at 5 p.m. So thank you everyone who's kind of joined with kind of comments and your priorities in this first session. Please do pass on the YouTube link and let people know if you know anyone in Vauxhall or beyond who might like to join our conversation, or an Animal Crossing user who might want to come and have a tour of our island. That'd be really fantastic. But yeah, thanks again, and we'll see you shortly.
Yeah, thank you everyone. Great. So now we are live again. Welcome everyone. We've got a little minute to kick off. So I'll let Duncan get his tech gear off and getting ready.
Yep. I think we are pretty much all set. So it's 5 o'clock. Shall we get started?
Let's get cracking. Oh, so welcome everyone who is joining. Hopefully, perhaps there are some people who joined from the last session that we did at 4 and are sort of now have an understanding of what we're up to and are kind of more keen to kind of hopefully get involved in the chat. But if you are completely new, that is a-okay. We are gonna do the whole thing over again and give you a good background as to what we're doing, what the heck we're up to on Animal Crossing, and who we are. So to kick things off, I'll introduce myself. My name is Abby. I work for New Practice as a designer. I am joined by my colleague Duncan.
Hello, I'm Duncan and I'm an associate, also at New Practice.
And we've got Becca.
Hi, I'm Becca, creative director and architect at New Practice.
Great. So the way that today is going to run, we've got a couple of activities that we would like you guys to kind of join us in conversation around, which kind of largely looks at different priorities. This whole project is sort of surrounding the area, Vauxhall, South London. But we can talk sort of broadly around sort of priorities in your particular area. If you aren't necessarily Vauxhall based, that is a-okay. These kind of priorities are important to discuss and kind of get reflections upon, and that is kind of applicable across the globe. So to kick us off and give us a bit more of a background as the project, we've got Becca, who has been sort of leading this to date. So Becca, I don't know if you could kind of give us a little bit of a background, what this project's about, who we're doing it for, and what the heck we're doing on Animal Crossing.
So, welcome to Vauxhall Crossing. It's a project that we are delivering for Vauxhall 1, which is the bid in Vauxhall in South London, and as part of London Festival of Architecture. So we first kind of kicked up a relationship with Vauxhall 1 a few years ago when we did another project for London Festival of Architecture where we dressed as monsters based on the architecture of Vauxhall and had a fun day in Vauxhall Pleasure Gardens, really thinking about how the architecture and the kind of iconic buildings and surroundings of that park really shaped Vauxhall as a place. So this is really continuing on that relationship and building on it and thinking specifically about how we can engage and work with young people to really listen to their voices and understand what they need, what they want, what their ambitions are, and whether, you know, if they're growing up in Vauxhall, what would make it something they want to kind of stay and be young adults as well. So I think that's really what we're doing it for.
Great. And I don't know if you want to give us a little bit more of context as to why we've kind of chosen Animal Crossing today for our vehicle. How has that been relevant to projects that we've done previously? And why is that relevant to a Vauxhall project in particular?
Yeah, so I guess really picking up on the kind of playful aesthetic of the monsters, but also thinking about how we can be in spaces where people already are. So we've done previous work where we've used Minecraft and where we've used lots of social media tools as engagement opportunities. But for this one, we really wanted to pick on a different kind of game, a different object that we could use as a vehicle, and try to understand this as something where, you know, you can make places in Animal Crossing. You can really think about what deserves to be on your island. What are the things that make your places work? And we can't really do this sort of testing in the real world. It's very expensive, and if we get it wrong, then people have to live in our mistakes. But you can do this sort of experimentation in a video game, and you can build wild and wacky things that wouldn't work in the real world. But you could also really think about what would work for us, you know, day to day. So I know Abby's been thinking about it a lot when she's been building her island. But yeah, so trying to think of what other tools aside from the kind of obvious Minecraft. Animal Crossing is not Minecraft. You can't do all the same things, but there are, you know, those other ways we can think about place through this tool in particular.
I know as a kind of avid Animal Crosser since the start of last year when the game launched, and it kind of coincided. It was that kind of time of watching Tiger King and playing Animal Crossing at the start of kind of COVID restrictions. Having that kind of freedom and that kind of imagination is really fun, and it is, as I guess, as an architect or someone who's kind of invested in kind of place-based making, the idea of kind of the kind of huge array of kind of items and themes and kind of things that you can play with, it is quite it is kind of a place-based game, which is really exciting.
In the sort of games that I think can be really powerful, like The Sims or, you know, Roller Coaster Tycoon, those sorts of games that I played when I was a lot younger, where you could do the same thing. You can build places, you can build spaces, and you can kind of be in control, which again is not something that many of us get to be in actual cities, at the places where we live and work and play.
Definitely. I think as well, one of the reasons that it must have been so attractive during this time is that you can create a world that you would like to see. I think that maybe one of the, or an interesting outcome perhaps is, or would be, if people were to sort of share their islands with us, picking out those themes that people felt important enough to spend all their bells on, and sort of create these scenes that were important to them for some reason or another. And I think, as Becca was kind of saying earlier, it's an interesting reflection as to how, or people's islands would be an interesting reflection as to how they would like to see their world, how they would like to see their immediate space and place. I think on top of why we've all of that as reasoning as to why we've kind of picked Animal Crossing is I know that Vauxhall in particular has this incredible asset of the Vauxhall City Farm, which we've had a close relationship with for the previous project, but also will continue to in this one. And we kind of thought that having that asset and that being sort of something that's celebrated within Vauxhall, picking Animal Crossing was maybe a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but something that perhaps we could kind of celebrate a little bit in our own sort of engagement setting.
Yeah. And we will be hosting a physical event on Saturday where we'll be taking a lot of the aesthetic from Animal Crossing, so it'll be quite sweet, it'll be quite cute, but really is a place where we can kind of test some ideas that have been explored digitally in person, and also test ideas with people who haven't engaged with us digitally, either because they haven't got Animal Crossing, or because they haven't they're coming across the project for the first time on Saturday. So we'll be in Vauxhall Pleasure Gardens with our own physical Animal Crossing islands on Saturday from 10 till 4. And as Abby just mentioned, I forgot to say earlier, Vauxhall City Farm will be joining us, and they'll be bringing some animals. We'll have some guinea pigs, some alpacas, some goats, and I'm really looking forward to hanging out with all of those guys and all of you guys.
You and me both. Great. So I think to kind of kick things off, what I'll do, I know that I've been kind of talking about, islands, how they represent your space, the space that you'd like to see in the world. So I'll just quickly give you a bit of a whistle-stop tour as to what we've been doing on this island, or what I've been doing in too many hours that I would like to, or more than I'd like to admit, I think. Kind of showing you what perhaps I would like to see, or show you what I think reflects key things in sort of a great space that would look to sort of attract visitors. To give you a bit of a background on what Animal Crossing is, it's obviously, we've kind of talked broadly around it, but essentially you're kind of given this avatar and you are given a home, and what you're invited to do is undertake several tasks, sort of short adventures, or definitely sort of task-based activities in order to improve your island in various ways, in order to attract residents. So you can get, I think, 10 max residents, and we're currently sitting on 6, so apparently the island isn't doing that bad. So here's the whistle-stop tour of different things that I think are sort of important and we've built in this island. So first things first, we're starting off at my house. So we've got this white garden, which is influenced by my own dad's garden, who apparently he's decided to plant lots of white flowers, so I thought I'd do something similar. One of the other things that I think is quite important to this particular island is the amount of pumpkins and fruit, vegetables growing. I think that these patches are obviously accessible to all of the different residents across the island, and it kind of really very much sort of speaks to the themes of things that I think are important, such as sort of community growing and greening space, and making sure that that's included in people's immediate spaces, even if, people aren't necessarily given back gardens, they have access to these kinds of areas. So going into a next key bit of the island, we've got a small area for young people to play. We've got sort of small toys, a toy box, a ring toss, a little pool, which obviously you may not want to use today seeing as it's raining, very reflective of what's happening in Glasgow at the moment. But this is kind of just a small area for people or young people to play, but also perhaps for parents to pop their kids whilst they go and sort of access the retail area, which is up in the back here. We've got this retail, the Able Sisters seamstresses, but also sort of fashion shop. And then we also have the museum, which sort of collects all of the different bugs and fish that you sort of fish for, collect, catch across your time on the island. Obviously, culture is incredibly important, and so it was good. I think, you know, you have to have a museum as you take part in the game, but obviously it was something that the game creators thought was incredibly important to have across all islands. And then finally, we've kind of got this little bit of a exercise area. I think that it's important to kind of, there's sort of this, I don't know how long this has been a bit of a phase for, but I think certainly in my immediate area, there's lots of outdoor gyms popping up. And this is my, tropical island fantasy version where, you know, if I have to work out, I might as well be on a beach. So then we'll kind of take you a little bit onto where, finally, run right past it. Finally, we've got this space which is just open. It's definitely a sort of a community space where people can come together, bring their own food, but also just have a space where people can come together, celebrate something, communicate, have a picnic. And we've got the fires always going and sort of community accessible table layout setups, and also a chair so grandma can kind of come along as well. So before we go into the engagement section of today,
Change into my engagement clothing, celebrating the London Festival of Architecture, which is what this event is ultimately part of.
yeah, great. Duncan's taken the time to kind of create his own little outfit for LFA, and the outfit that I'm adorning today is largely based on what I am wearing right now. Great. So, if people were to join on Animal Crossing, this would be a little place that people could come and sort of pick up party poppers and sit as we were to introduce the project. What we've done is kind of create these little sections, which we'll kind of run through a little bit in a second. But these will sort of largely reflect the themes that we're looking to sort of explore with you. Duncan, I don't know if you wanted to kind of go over loosely what we're looking to do today.
Sure. So the theme of the London Festival of Architecture 2021 is care. It's quite a broad kind of provocation for this year's festival. I think reflecting on the last 18 months, I think there's a huge emphasis on how we reflect on the built environment and its capacity and to act as a space for care, and how we as all kind of actors in the production of the built environment are have to consider care as like really critical to the outcomes of everything we're doing. We've themed the 3 sections we'd like to talk to people about as part of our engagement today, but also our in-person engagement on Saturday, around 3 specific themes. So one of those is around care for communities. So how do we care for our communities? How do we create healthy and communities that are that create spaces that people feel a part of and feel belonging to. Mm-hmm. Another is around caring for young people. So the experience of the last kind of 18 months has been a huge upheaval for everyone, but I think young people have felt that particularly acutely. Their abilities to socialize, their abilities to learn, to take part in a lot of the activities that are really pivotal to your, I guess, like the elements of going through and growing up and having those kind of threshold moments has really been impacted. And then the final one is really kind of zooming out from the community to the whole planet. How do we care for the planet? How do we care for the environment? And how do the actions at a local level in Vauxhall and in other neighbourhoods where we live, how does that impact on a wider conversation about how we care for the planet? And obviously none of these things operate entirely in and of themselves. They're all interdependent, and decisions about how we care for our communities impact how we care for the planet, and vice versa. we've got some kind of questions to get us kicked off. So I'm going to load up the first of those in just a second.
So while Duncan's doing that, I'll explain the way in which you can, as a chat user, as someone who's sort of logged in via YouTube, can participate. So earlier, New Practice had sort of loaded these different emojis, and these will reflect the different priorities that we've popped up today. So when we're looking at our first question, we have asked, how can we care for our community? So the themes that we've used here, or the priorities that we've sort of highlighted in regards to how different ways in which you could care for your community, are shopping, eating, and high street leisure, represented by the apple. Local cultural and sporting groups/events, represented by the peach. Access to local green space and facilities, represented by the cherry, and then environmental factors, represented by the orange. So if you would like to sort of vote on what your priority would be using the emojis, or you're welcome to write it up in the chat as well, and we'll kind of just talk around these sorts of themes and how they can be used to support the communities, in what ways that we've seen it elsewhere, and what other kind of experience that we've had speaking to people across projects locally and a bit more far, a bit further afield, have been sort of addressed or thought about. So if you had any kind of ideas of what your priorities would be, pop them in the chat for us and we'll kind of talk around that.
So while we wait, I know we've kind of created this facilitation space. This is all kind of a bit of an experiment. So last year, as a kind of practice, a kind of architecture practice with a kind of focus on how we bring kind of communities, community organisations, local residents into decision-making processes. Our kind of usual way of working was really kind of thrown completely out of kilter. So obviously, so much of that is kind of very hands-on, messy, working in kind of workshops and public spaces. And the start of the pandemic was a huge upheaval in our kind of working processes. How do we engage people? How do we bring them into kind of meaningful conversations when we can't be in the same space? And I think that was particularly the case around how do you engage young people? So often we'll go into schools and kind of have these structured sessions that help to kind of draw out young people's kind of perceptions on their built environment, or kind of help them to express creativity in the built environment, and that's obviously really challenging to deliver. So as Becca spoke about kind of at the beginning of this session, Minecraft was one tool that we've used, and Animal Crossing, as we spoke about before, it's like this it's about creating places, and it's a game which is definitely I certainly play it, and I'm not a kid, but it's definitely a pretty kid-friendly space. So the opportunity to kind of create these places seem to offer a huge amount of opportunity for kind of creativity and doing that in a kind of playful and fun way. Mm-hmm. We did have one comment in the chat a little bit earlier from Hannah, who said, I especially love links between mental health and the outdoors. So, I mean, I wonder if we can sort of take that back to the conversation we had in the session before around kind of the caring for young people and the ways in which, their opportunities to take part in so many of the, the everyday experiences of being a young person was really disrupted by COVID-19, really critically in the first few months when everyone was kind of sheltering at home, and it was a really challenging time for people to perhaps feel quite isolated, and I know that it's not the same, but playing games like Animal Crossing was one way in which you had that kind of social experience. But I think green space has been really critical to the COVID recovery, or the kind of COVID social experience, and that's the same, I think, for everyone. But I think for young people, that access to socializing is so critical to kind of having friends and just being a young person and just kind of being in the world. So yeah, like having green spaces, particularly in kind of urban spaces like Vauxhall, where maybe not everyone has gardens and can't kind of host friends. It seems like such a critical outlet.
Yeah, I've popped in a cherry just on the back of. I know that Hannah had kind of added that comment a lot earlier, but I feel like it kind of really speaks to sort of this access to local green space and facilities as a means of which we can care for our community, just for all of the reasons that Duncan has outlined there. It's important and has been important to everyone for the last year to access these areas in order to feel any kind of community, any kind of interaction period was largely done outdoors for at least 6 months. So having, I don't know, what would be an interesting conversation, perhaps something to explore a bit more on Saturday, is more around how has the way in which we see and value this green space, which perhaps was valued but certainly now is in a very different way, and how can we create and support and utilize these spaces and shape these spaces that continues to support the community in the best way possible. I think that would be an interesting conversation to have.
Yeah. I think one of the things we picked up on the session at 4:00 was around the idea that green space, and particularly green space in urban areas, can be quite kind of contested to some extent, because it's very kind of often very intensively used by a big, wide, diverse community. And I think in London, so many parks have this kind of dual use that are sometimes in conflict between outdoor events that bring people together, and I'm sure so many people are really enthusiastic about getting back to that opportunity to be in big crowds and to take part in these kind of big events, but at the same time being kind of refuges away from the kind of hustle and bustle of the city. And I think when you can find spaces that are able to manage and handle those kind of dual responsibilities, I think those make for really fantastic places, because they offer something, I think, for both the kind of both those kind of competing, well, not necessarily competing, because I enjoy taking part in both, but having that kind of flexibility can be really fantastic. And if you look at somewhere like Vauxhall Pleasure Gardens, it has this long history of being this kind of very theatrical space of performance, and I think there's but at the same time, on a day-to-day basis, it is this kind of little kind of urban oasis, like with kind of green space that kind of can take you out of the hustle and bustle of that part of South East London.
Should we move on into the sort of young people? I know we've dipped in and out of kind of speaking about how green space definitely can have a influence on the way in which young people feel like they have access to a particular area. I know that, and thinking about previous projects, how important these outdoor spaces are for young people, because they are freely accessible. They are often overlooked, not in a sense that they're ignored, but there's sort of shared vigilance within it, particularly in sort of areas such as skate parks or play parks. I think one of the things that young people perhaps feel, or something that's come up in previous engagement exercises with young people, particularly the older set of young people, is that they're aware of the way that their presence can come across, particularly to perhaps an older generation of people, and just feeling as though they perhaps can be threatening, and understanding and being willing to try and sort of create these other opportunities to sort of bridge that gap and make sure that people aren't necessarily threatened by their presence. And these spaces that are created that are accessed by young people could also be very much freely accessed by the rest of the community. So that's something that's quite interesting, I think.
Just for anyone who's kind of jumped on the stream and is trying to catch up with what the emojis at the bottom do mean. So what we're asking is a kind of question, a kind of quite broad open question about priorities. So how can we care for young people? And we've put in 5 different kind of themes. And if you have a particular priority that you'd like to kind of share with us or talk to us, you're welcome to drop one of those 5 emojis in the chat. And yeah, we can kind of explore those in more detail. I think yeah, kind of linking, we're about to go on and talk about the kind of final theme that we're exploring today, which is how do we care for the planet. You know, I think we touched upon in the kind of previous session around the idea in which young people are increasingly, you know, kind of very conscious of themselves as kind of actors and agents in a really, you know, this kind of global story of the climate crisis. And I think, you know, it's really interesting. I think it's a big culture shift, you know, from when I was a kind of school-age person, is to think of, you know, my actions as kind of significant to that kind of huge story of kind of our kind of fight against climate change and the impacts that our individual actions have on that. Maybe it's probably useful for us to jump across to that kind of final theme just now.
Yeah, so how can we care for our planet? So the priorities that we'd picked for these for people to explore or vote upon were changing behaviours, supporting others, taking part in community-led green activities, activism, and improving green space. So I think we've talked quite a lot upon improving green space. The one in which I will clarify a little bit is taking part in community-led green activities. And that's definitely sort of looking at these group-led local activities that run around things like litter picking or recycling or upcycling or greening, planting, these kinds of activities which have real weight, real sort of can kind of start a community movement around these kinds of themes and engage different people who perhaps may not be otherwise engaged. And yeah, you know how you kind of get into these things. It's through family or friends and kind of having something that links out and perhaps passes through word of mouth, but has an incredibly important role in communities and community building. I think, Duncan, you were about to talk about sort of activism, which would be the orange emoji.
Yeah, well, I mean, then linking back to that idea of kind of young people as seeing themselves as part of that story, you know, the climate strikes and kind of the activism of kind of young people has been, you know, this kind of huge kind of cultural moment over the last few years, and it's interesting to tie back that idea to how people act upon that kind of desire to do the best they can for the care of the planet, to, you know, how do we act at a local level. And I think we were talking about in the first session that idea that you've got these young people who you know, think really quite radically about, you know, what's needed to be done, you know, at this kind of quite high policy level around climate change and the climate crisis, and then you've got this kind of much longer standing tradition, and I don't know if you want to call it activism, around how people improve public space through greenery in really at times really simple ways. You know, you know, a Vauxhall in Bloom style group is a kind of a way of placemaking through greenery that is a very long-standing tradition in a kind of British context, and there's so many community organisations who do amazing work around greening their local places, and it seems like such an exciting opportunity to kind of see how that kind of youth-led moment around the conversation on the climate, on you know, caring for the planet, you know, kind of intersects with that much longer tradition of caring for your local place and making your local place green and you know all of and those are part of the same story, and they're part of that same movement. I think, you know, it's exciting for me to imagine how you create a narrative around how that all links together, and how that you know, how that local activity is part of that kind of global challenge.
I wonder as well, just kind of before we wrap up, just this final thought on environment is how, and this is something that I had brought up earlier on in this session, is about how our relationship with spaces have changed, particularly outdoor spaces and green spaces, and people who haven't had access to private gardens. I wonder if there has been a real shift in sort of feeling of ownership and responsibility for these sort of publicly owned spaces, or publicly accessed spaces, and how perhaps we can kind of take that feeling of ownership and change it into authorship, and begin to kind of take those steps in kind of creating a space which reflects local priorities, I guess, to kind of link back to the conversation that we're having today, and hopefully one that we'll be exploring on Saturday.
Yeah, for those who are just tuning in, or maybe didn't catch the introduction at the beginning of this session, New Practice are going to be leading an in-person event in Vauxhall Pleasure Gardens on Saturday between 10 and 4 p.m. That's going to replicate a lot of what we've been doing here, which is leading conversations around care for young people, care for the planet, care for our communities, through a series of kind of installations that are little Animal Crossing islands in Vauxhall Pleasure Gardens. We're also going to be joined by Vauxhall City Farm, who are bringing some of their fabulous selection of animals to join us. So, unfortunately, I'm not going to be part of the team on that day, but Abby, I know you're pretty excited about getting to meet alpacas, guinea pigs, and other creatures.
Yep, that is for sure.
So yeah, if you're local to Vauxhall, please do drop by. You're also able to book a ticket through our Eventbrite. So if you are on the London Festival of Architecture website and you search for Vauxhall Crossing, you'll find details of how to register your place to take part. We're going to drop off for about 25 minutes and come back for our final session between 6 and around 6:30. So it would be great if anyone is able to join us then, and do feel free to pass on the word about the event. It'd be great to have some more conversations as we go forward. Thanks, everybody.
See you at 6. afternoon, evening, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us for the final session today of Vauxhall Crossing Online. My name is Abby. I am a designer at New Practice, and I will be chatting you through what we're doing this afternoon, evening. I don't really know, 6 p.m. depends on your perspective, I guess. I am joined by my colleague Duncan.
Hello, I'm Duncan, also from New Practice, and I'm an associate there.
And Becca.
I am Becca, Creative Director and Architect at New Practice.
Great. So today we're going to be doing a bit of an online engagement. We're looking for people who have joined us this afternoon, evening, to kind of engage with us and chat to us via the chat box in the right hand of your screen, hopefully. And kind of what we're doing is sort of exploring different priorities for your local area. The project that we're doing is in Vauxhall, in the south of London. This is a part of a larger project that we're undertaking, and it will be paired with physical engagement on Saturday, this Saturday, within Vauxhall Pleasure Gardens. So Becca has been leading on this project. So Becca, would you be able to kind of give me a bit more of a background, what this project's about, who we're doing it for, and what the heck we're doing on Animal Crossing?
Yes, so welcome to Vauxhall Crossing is a project that we're doing for Vauxhall 1 and as part of London Festival of Architecture. So we've done previous work as part of London Festival of Architecture with Vauxhall 1. A couple of years ago we were in Vauxhall Pleasure Gardens on a lovely sunny Saturday afternoon, dressed as monsters, kind of characters drawn from the iconic architecture of Vauxhall and kind of the surrounds. So really that was the kind of the beginning of our relationship with Vauxhall 1. And this is kind of building on these thoughts about what we do with our communities, how we understand our neighbourhoods, both iconic and ordinary, and what we want them to look like in the future. So we'll be pairing with Vauxhall City Farm and doing a physical event on Saturday, and that will really draw on a lot of the work that we've been doing digitally through Animal Crossing over the past month.
Great, yeah, thank you. So I wonder, Becca, if you wanted to kind of draw out a little bit as to why exactly we're using Animal Crossing as a means for engagement?
Yeah, so I think it really lines into a lot of the work we do around digital engagement and finding ways that are different and exciting and innovative is an overused word, but innovative in speaking to people about their neighbourhoods, their communities, their spaces. And we previously used platforms like Minecraft or various social media platforms, and we thought we wanted to expand the ways that we can use games and game technology to really be a tool that's quite useful. Obviously, lots of us have been on Animal Crossing over the past 16 to 18 months since its launch. And lots of us have been using this space to really explore our own ideas around building or place making, even if we haven't really articulated it as that. So yeah, it's not quite Minecraft. We can't do everything we can do in Minecraft, but it is a new way of thinking about spaces and places and understanding kind of our position within it. And it's a place where people can really have quite a lot of control around their environments, which is possibly part of why it's been so popular over the last year of uncertainty. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I really got on the Animal Crossing bandwagon in March of last year when the game launched, and that obviously coincided with the kind of the very beginning of pandemic and the kind of COVID-19 lockdowns and restrictions. And I think having that kind of creative play space was a huge opportunity for people to kind of express themselves, but it also has that kind of social element to it as well. And I think, you know, as Becca, as you pointed towards it, it is placemaking in a kind of cartoonish, kind of fantastical way. You know, you're thinking quite carefully about what makes for a good place, what are the kind of items and elements that make for the sort of place that you want to create and share with all of the kind of animals that you know inhabit on this island. So it creates a a kind of fun kind of little microcosm of a lot of the kind of decision making processes that go into decision making in the real world.
I think on top of that, and one of the reasons that we picked Animal Crossing in particular for this Vauxhall specific project is because in the previous project that we had done, but also this project, we identify as one of the key assets that Vauxhall has access to is the city farm. And having worked with them previously, but also working with them throughout this bout of engagement also, we thought that maybe Animal Crossing was a little bit of a perhaps tongue-in-cheek way to kind of celebrate that asset and very much kind of celebrate the locality of Vauxhall, or try and have a bit of a reference to it in our own funny way.
So we'll be picking up a lot of the visuals, a lot of the tools that we're showing kind of digitally on this island, in our own physical islands on Saturday, and we will be joined by lots of lovely animals from Vauxhall City Farm. There are some alpacas and some guinea pigs, and I think some goats as well are definitely going to be joining us, along with a few others. So that at that island, those physical islands, people will be able to explore through building with physical toolkits, but also again, some of the priorities and discussions that we're going to have around today, particularly around the kind of themes of London Festival of Architecture, which this year is care. So really thinking about how we care for our communities, how we care for young people within those communities, and how we care for our planet in the midst of a climate crisis. So those are really the themes we're going to pick up on today and at this weekend's physical in-person event.
Great. And Becca, just before you go, just as a final very clear plug for our event on Saturday, where will we be and what time will we be there?
We will be at Vauxhall Pleasure Gardens at the Tyres Street entrance next to Vauxhall City Farm from 10 a.m. until 4 p.m. on Saturday, and you can drop in at any point. We will have COVID-safe procedures in place, so we might have to ask you to wait for a couple of minutes while someone else clears an island, but we'd be delighted for anyone to drop in and come and see us and bring family members and friends with you.
Great. Thank you very much. We're looking forward to seeing you there, Becca.
Yes.
Cool. So kind of going into Animal Crossing as a platform, a game, I'll give you, just in case you aren't that familiar, a little bit of a background as to what it is, what the idea is. So generally you're kind of given an opportunity to create an avatar, which perhaps represents yourself, perhaps represents a future version of yourself that you would like to become. You're given a small house, and what you're trying to do is sort of undertake these tasks or small adventures that will then influence and entice more residents to come to your island. So you have a max amount of residents that you're able to host at any one point, and our Vauxhall Island is currently sitting at 6, and I think the max is around 10, so I think we're doing pretty good in Vauxhall at the moment. So kind of talking about how, this kind of game it provides a space for people to create perhaps what they would like to see in their local area, but in sort of this game space. We thought we'd give you a bit of a whistle-stop tour of the ways in which we've kind of tried to distill these kind of small areas and how they reflect the priorities that, well, particularly me, I've spent a few hours on kind of trying to prep this and create this for you guys. So these will be, or this whistle-stop tour will kind of give you an idea of the priorities that I find and the priorities that I hold for my local space, and I'll kind of quickly talk you through how I've kind of distilled that in this Vauxhall Island as an example for you guys today. So first and foremost, we have my humble abode, accompanied by my white garden, which has been inspired perhaps by my own father, who is apparently planting a white garden in his house, which I thought was kind of ridiculous, but I thought I would have a little bit of a nod to that. The second part is this kind of growing space. So across the island you'll see lots of fruit and vegetables growing in areas, and I think that largely reflects my personal priorities of having local green space that's accessible by residents, free of charge, so people can kind of grow and sort of pick things and understand what it means to have a bit of a green thumb, but also has access to free food should they need to, or like to kind of cook with free food or food in general. The second part of the island that I will highlight for you is this sort of small area that I've built up for young people. It's just a little play space that you can have access for toys. Perhaps parents could come and drop their young people off to, have a little bit of time and take a tiny stroll up into the into the retail area. So we've got a sort of fashion shop hosted by the Able sisters, a couple of local residents, as well as the museum. So the museum isn't something that you can kind of invite to the island. It's something that starts on the island with you, which I think is quite interesting as a sort of game development choice, and kind of highlighting culture as a really important sort of starter point for islands and sort of growing communities and areas. The other point that we've got here on our tour is this kind of outdoor gym that we've created. I don't know how long the sort of trend has gone on, but I know that there are a few outdoor gyms that are kind of popping up in my area in particular. And I think it's important, and it's been very interesting seeing the types of people that have been on this particular structure. There are people who use it for personal training sessions, but then there are also kids who are just wanting to kind of jungle gym through it. And I think that even though it's kind of centered around sort of physical health, there is an element of sort of community and bringing people together around this, which I think has been great to see, but also is incredibly important. And then finally, a little space that I've kind of created is this very community focused area where we've got cups and picnic equipment, there's fires always going, there's a chair for grandma, and it's just a space that people can bring their own food and sort of get together, celebrate something, or just have a chat. I think particularly over the last year or so, there's been a real phase of moving these sort of social parts of our lives outdoors, and I think this was kind of largely created to kind of reflect that shift. So now we'll go into the engagement aspect of the island. And Duncan, you've changed your outfit.
I've shifted into my engagement togs, so I've got my LFA t-shirt as part of the London Festival of Architecture 2021. We've also got, we're representing new practice as well, got some flags, etc. to display.
Of course. Cool. So, very quickly, obviously if you're watching and you have access to Animal Crossing, the dodo code is in the bottom right, so you'd be able to join us should you wish. But the way in which we'll largely expect you to participate is through the chat box, which should be on the right of your screen. So we'll be asking you several questions over the course of the next 15-20 minutes, and we're just inviting you to input any insight, your experience, or anything that you would like to share with us, and we'll kind of talk around a number of different themes and priorities which sort of come under those. And Duncan, I don't know if you want to kind of explain loosely what specifically we'll be doing to do that.
Sure. So the theme of this year's London Festival of Architecture is care, which is pretty broad kind of provocation around how do we consider care as part of the built environment, as part of the kind of architectural profession, as practitioners, and I guess as kind of people who experience the built environment, which I think is a really interesting theme after 18 months of the COVID-19 pandemic, to think quite carefully and critically at times about what are the sorts of spaces we want to create that care for and nurture people and communities. So we want to we have 3 questions to kind of pose to kind of viewers and people engaging in our process, both today and as part of the in-person engagement event in Vauxhall Pleasure Gardens on Saturday. So the first of those is around how do we care for communities? So how do we create spaces that are caring? How do we nurture communities and make sure that communities can come together around locality, around shared interests? What role does the built environment play in ensuring that communities feel happy and healthy and connected to one another? The second is how we care for young people. So I think really critically in the last 18 months, the experiences of young people have been really, really impacted by COVID. Of course, everyone's experiences have been impacted, but many of the kind of threshold experiences of youth that many of us associate with growing up have been really challenging to take part in. Going to school, just being able to take part in clubs and activities, and it's really been quite disruptive in many unpredictable ways to young people. So how can we reflect on the last 18 months and beyond, beyond this kind of time of COVID, and reflect how care for young people can be embedded into our thinking around production of the built environment. And then finally, we're kind of zooming out in some respects, but also, it's a question for all of us as individuals is how do we care for the planet? How do we care for the environment? And how do the choices we make at local levels and as built environment professionals impact our experience on this planet at a time when we know the climate crisis poses, significant challenges for ourselves and future generations. And that really links back to both of those topics. How do choices at a community level and how do ways that we act at a community level impact the climate and the planet? How do the actions of young people and young people's huge engagement over the last couple of years through the climate strikes and kind of other activist models offer opportunities for reflecting on how we care for the planet?
Great. So the way in which we're going to talk to you and ask you to engage is in a minute on the screen. There's going to be a question along the bottom that outlines our first priority, and then our first theme, and then we've got several priorities that sit underneath that. So for the first question, we're kind of looking at how do we care, or how can we care for our community? So in terms of our priorities, we have shopping, eating, and high street leisure, which would be represented by an apple. Local cultural and sporting groups/events, represented by peach. Access to local green space and facilities, represented by cherries. And environmental factors, represented by an orange. So what we're asking you to do today is to engage, pick one of those themes, copy and paste the emoji. We should have popped in the emojis earlier on in the chat, or Duncan's going to do that just now for you. And so copy and paste the one that you feel is your top priority. And what we'll do is kind of talk around that theme for a bit and kind of talk around our experience, what we've been talking to other communities about, what other projects are out there, and we'll just run through those 3 themes and those priorities based on feedback that we get from you guys, or kind of just general conversations that we've had throughout the last few years, I guess, as we've been practitioners.
Yeah, you can see that we've left the fruit that people have selected from previous sessions. So we've also been chatting to people at 4 p.m. and 5 p.m. This afternoon. So there was a preference from people dropping into the chat to pick the cherry emoji, which refers to kind of access to local green space and facilities. And I think our work specifically in this project, which is, you know, the in-person event on Saturday, is all about taking place, you know, it's all about activating Vauxhall Pleasure Gardens. I think it was really interesting to kind of reflect on the role that parks and green space like Vauxhall Pleasure Gardens plays in communities like Vauxhall, which is this, you know, very urban neighbourhood within, you know, the City of London. And there's a kind of dual role that often these green spaces play. One is around being that kind of space of relief from the kind of hustle and bustle of the city, and being, particularly during COVID, like a really critical space for people who don't have access to their own gardens. That's obviously the case out with COVID, but particularly over the last 18 months, where socialising with other people has been really, there's been a real emphasis on trying to do that outdoors and in as safe a way as possible. Those sorts of green spaces are just really utterly vital to creating community, to fostering spaces where people can actually come together. And then beyond that, and this is something I'm sure many people are really enthusiastic to getting back to, you know, I know I am, is taking part in bigger community events, and green spaces in cities often are that kind of, that space to bring people together through music, through performance, through sport, through kind of cultural activity of all sorts. And I know that you know, the history of Vauxhall Pleasure Gardens is really focused around that idea of, you know, that kind of really long-standing history of it being a place of theatre, of performance, and so many green spaces across London and in other, you know, similar cities offer that kind of space. But at times, I guess there can be conflict between a green space that offers that opportunity for a city versus, you know, on people perhaps from miles around, and then also a green space that can, you know, be, you know, a smaller scale, you know, for friends and families coming together on quieter, in quieter, smaller ways. And I think, you know, that's something that is kind of a critical challenge in making sure that neighbourhoods have access to all sorts of kind of green space and outdoor space.
I wonder if we can perhaps talk around some of the themes that haven't necessarily been picked on, just to kind of explore them a bit. So I wonder, obviously we kind of had Apple, and we talked a little bit about previously about how that the use of the high street has been changing, and how perhaps the pandemic providing a bit of an opportunity for people who have always had a bit of a passion or have been on the brink of wanting to do something. It's provided them this space in order to kind of just jump in it, and with that, we've found that, you know, particular parts of maybe smaller high streets, more so, have had smaller local businesses pop up, and that's been sort of shaping the way, or sort of changing the direction perhaps a little bit of the way that we use high streets. But that's something that we've kind of covered somewhat, and if you're interested, I presume you can kind of just scroll back in the conversation that we've had. But I wonder, Duncan, if you wanted to kind of talk a little bit perhaps around sort of local cultural sporting groups, events, how that could be perceived or utilized as something that would be caring for our community.
Yeah, I mean, I guess to go back to the idea about how COVID, I mean, it's so tricky in these sorts of events. Any conversation that you're having about the future, it's hard to untangle that from the last 18 months and how we have obviously missed so much of the kind of social, cultural aspects of life that you know we were used to, and that we anticipate and we hope that those return back to where they were before. And it's sometimes difficult to untangle how the reflection upon what has happened during COVID impacts and shapes what might happen in the future, both for good and for bad. There are aspects of the ways that in which certain, you know, cultural activities, you know, going to big open public events may be, you know, forever changed by COVID, and we can't really predict it. We're still kind of in the midst of it, and it's so difficult to pick. But I mean, you just have to, I think going reflection on young people is missing out on clubs and activities and these really central parts to young people's identities and so much of what helps them to form their kind of formative experiences of their own kind of sense of self. And I think that idea of those sorts of clubs and activities is a space that nurtures and cares and creates both a community and a sense of self is hugely important, and it's only been highlighted more by the last 18 months and kind of missing out on that space to come together and to kind of have a shared interest and express that together.
I wonder if that's quite a good segue to go into the next theme of young people and focusing on how we can support our local young people, whether that be in Vauxhall or whether that be wherever those who are watching are from or live. What are the ways in which we can kind of support this community of young people in order to make sure that they're sort of thriving or being supported in what their heart desires?
Yeah, I mean that kind of club and space for people to kind of come together around shared interests is really important. But I guess looking at what people had picked up on previously, there was some interest in talking about kind of education, employment, and again it's been so massively impacted by COVID, and people's experiences of being in education and their kind of post-educational transitions have been really impacted by not being able to gather and not being able to take part in school or college or university or post education employment as took place before. But these local communities, that kind of that space for exploring, I think, to go back even further to our conversation around green space, there was some really interesting comments about how educational models maybe change as a result of some of the reflections on the last 18 months. There's already a big emphasis on play, on outdoor space as these spaces that can offer huge advantages to kind of traditional learning environments. Can the built environment become a place that nurtures education in a way that perhaps it can be slightly hostile to in some respects, because it's so often orientated around kind of adult experiences of jobs and of kind of commerce and retail, etc. That can urban space, can green space, can places like Vauxhall Pleasure Gardens. We've got some great assets, as we identified before, like the City Farm, which offers an amazing insight into aspects of life and aspects of kind of production of food and of livestock and things that you don't get in very rarely get in urban spaces. So how does the built environment potentially foster alternative models for caring for young people through education and through kind of educational environments? I think is a really interesting question.
Yeah, I guess one of the things that we are exploring and perhaps often explore and where innovation lies is where these intersections can sit between something like engagement and also education, but also something like green space or farming or other kind of assets that particular areas have access to, and that being a very interesting space to explore, and would be perhaps a way in which people can access something that they never felt that they were previously privy to or previously would be able to join in on, based on particular access needs or support needs. I think that applies very clearly to education, and one of the things that had sort of been brought up in previous conversations was this idea of like the linearity of education and what is expected of people, and how perhaps these sort of new identified intersections that may not necessarily be, fit together very easily and have been something that goes very obviously hand in hand, but something that kind of could be a little bit sort of piece together and provide a completely new opportunity for people again to kind of access and create a very different path from perhaps one that was expected of particularly young people, I guess, as we're kind of talking in this instance, but also kind of carves a new path and a new pathway for other people to follow, and allows there to be more freedom of movement in people's lives. I think the linearity can be and feel very restricting as a young person, and by looking at and identifying these intersections, we're providing pockets of opportunity, which perhaps would be very interesting and accessible for lots of people, which ultimately is, I think, the top two most important things for me in regards to sort of young people's experience. So should we move on finally into the environment theme?
So the final of the kind of questions that are kind of guiding this kind of Vauxhall Crossing kind of community engagement process is kind of zooming out in some respects. It's like, how can we care for our planet? We are in the midst of a climate crisis. It's a topic which is at the forefront of many of our minds, and it shapes so much of our thinking around how can we as individuals, as small communities, act in the face of something that seems so kind of monumental and at times kind of terrifying. And I think one of the questions that kind of dropped in, I think just while we were in the break, was linking the ideas of kind of local and global politics, particularly at a kind of youth movement level. So we know that young people are really engaged in the climate crisis through movements like the climate strikes. There are figureheads of a kind of international climate movement that give young people a sense to see themselves reflected as actors with power to kind of make change in a way that I think when I was the age that Greta Thunberg is, there were not kind of those faces that perhaps gave me a sense that I am a political actor in this kind of moment, and I think that's really exciting, but it's also a huge responsibility to kind of place on a young generation that in many respects, of course, don't really have kind of political power. They can't vote and kind of act upon on a lot of these kind of desires and instincts. But yeah, we were chatting in previous session about, well, how do you link some of that to work that already takes place and maybe is about responding to how we care for our planet, that maybe people don't even kind of regard as part of that larger story or that larger picture. So, a Vauxhall in Bloom style movement, and you get them across, towns and cities across the UK. Community people, often retired aged people, coming together to use their volunteer time to create greenery and to create vibrancy in public space and impact the public realm in a really, what is a really long-standing, but again, kind of quite, often quite daring way. And how do you take that kind of long-standing tradition of understanding those changes as very local and about kind of local identity and pride, and linking them to, a conversation that's happening at a global level around how do these small impacts in every locality build up to be a significant, intervention in the kind of the narrative of the climate crisis.
I think as well, one of the things that I've found across sort of engagement projects is that there'll be one area that we're working with, and we'll speak to people and they'll say, hey, there's this great initiative I know that's going on in my neighborhood, like the next town along or the next area along, or particularly in sort of different sections of, I find, London. They understand what's happening in other boroughs and look to other local spaces, local communities for inspiration, for I guess kind of just an example, a precedence for other projects and other things that they could be doing locally. And this could be sort of larger projects, but it's also community-led stuff as well. And I think that some people perhaps think that, you know, like litter picking or doing this sort of vegan picnic once a week is just affecting or just improving or enticing to sort of local people. And you know, those activities are, is it likely that people from other boroughs are going to come to your specific litter pick? No, of course they're not. They've got their own boroughs to worry about. But what does happen is there is influence, and other people take that and catch wind of it, and that's the power in that, is kind of this word of mouth, this influence, this kind of leading the way aspect of these kinds of things, particularly around something such as sort of how can we care for our planet and the climate crisis. I think everyone's looking at each other, to each other for support, and kind of trying to answer these questions separately but also together about what the heck do we do here? What are our next steps? What are you guys doing? What can we do? So I think, yeah, these kinds of smaller interventions or smaller groups have a lot more power and a lot more influence than people think. So I think we're kind of coming to the end. I mean, we're 6 minutes over anyways. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks to everybody who's watched along or chimed in with a question or an emoji. As a reminder, we're going to be in Vauxhall Pleasure Gardens this Saturday between 10 and 4 p.m. for people to join. So it would be great to see people if they can come along. We will be joined by some of the wonderful animals from Vauxhall City Farm. So yeah, it's a great chance to come and join some real life animals. We've been spending a lot of time hanging around with Animal Crossing animals. So yeah, there's information you can find out on the London Festival of Architecture website. There's an Eventbrite where you can sign up, but on the day, we'll obviously have COVID-safe procedures in place, so there might be a bit of time where you need to wait to be able to take part in the activities. But fingers crossed, we can see some local people and people who are taking in some of the events of the London Festival of Architecture on Saturday, and kind of continue these conversations about care, about how we care for the planet, how we care for our communities, and how we care for young people as part of those processes. So thanks everybody, and speak to you on Saturday.
Thank you everyone. Have a nice evenings.